Yeah, well, I think we should take Chris from Georgia. He, him,
Okay.
he wants to say that he believes it's rational to conclude God exists, which is kind of what we're here for. Chris, how are you?
Chris, are you there?
Hello?
Hi,
Hello.
Chris.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay, I guess it's the delay. Yeah, I think it's rational to conclude God exists. I guess a little background about me. I was born and raised Christian. Started to deconvert around the age of maybe 18 or so. Became atheist or agnostic atheist. And then around 2019, I started to, I guess you could say, become like a generalized theist. After doing various research and looking into origin of life, origin of the universe, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I guess I would categorize myself as a sort of a panentheist. So I think that you can reasonably call the universe God, but God is more than the universe, and God is eminent in everything. So I guess that's what I believe in general.
Yeah. So
Okay, walk us through it then.
that's
Sorry,
what I
Ben.
was gonna say.
Walk us through the rational argument that brings you to that conclusion.
Okay, so I guess it's more like communicating like my intuition to you guys. So like, I feel like, if you look at the Big Bang Theory and you look at the idea that all matter, all space and time, everything was within like an infinitely dense sort of singularity at one point. And so you look at us now, and you consider the idea that we're conscious. And I guess it's rational to conclude that, perhaps that singularity might have some property akin to consciousness that allows for us to be conscious, or something like that, I guess.
So my question to you, I guess,
one way to think about
my
it.
question to you, I guess, would be, is intuition a good way to reach truth?
I think it's a way to reach truth. It might not be 100% reliable.
Right. So how do we determine,
yeah.
like, if intuition can be unreliable, then how do we determine which intuitions are reliable and which ones aren't?
So I mean, if you were to, I guess, try and make like some kind of metric to measure it against like some other method of acquiring truth, you could say like maybe maybe the frequency with which the intuition appears. So like, a lot of cultures throughout time have like sort of come up with the idea of God. And, perhaps that could mean that it's something that's ingrained within us to discover or like to realize or something like that, So maybe that could, so you could say like, if it's something that's pervasive around the world, it's like, okay, so what does this mean, I guess?
So if intuition, if you're saying that the way to verify intuition would be to basically set up an experiment, could we just use whatever experimental method instead of using intuition? Why do we then need to still fall back on intuition?
Well, I mean, I guess you don't have to fall back on it, but I guess what I'm saying is like that. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I guess.
Yeah, this is something for me that I talk a lot about intuition, and because I'm a physician, and there's a certain kind of colloquial term called like clinical intuition, and it's not really intuition, but I talk about this a lot because if we know that intuition is unreliable, we have to figure out kind of how we get to reliable information, because there are certain cases where, like, if you walk into a room and you get, like, if you're a doctor, you walk into a room with a patient who's unconscious, not breathing, etc., and you might explain to somebody, I got this intuition that this person wasn't doing well. But if you really look at the scenario, it wasn't intuition that told you that person wasn't doing well. It was the evidence around you that your brain just took in very quickly and synthesized quickly based on experience of knowing that in the past, when I've seen somebody who was unconscious and not breathing, more than likely something was not okay and I needed to intervene. And you see that pattern multiple times, and you get into kind of a comfort zone of I can reliably predict that this is going to be the case next time. It's not really intuition. There was evidence there that was the outcome. But if you only rely on that, like, it's fine to get into this pattern, that pattern setting, but there are plenty of times when that pattern fails you. And it's really important to not go back and rely on that pattern or rely on the intuition, even if it ended up being reliable a lot of the time. Because what about the cases where it wasn't? And that's something like, we see this a lot in medicine too, with regard to heart attacks. We have a pretty reliable pattern for males who get heart attacks, but you can't, we've noticed we are undiagnosing women with heart attacks because they present differently. So they don't fit our pattern. Anything that goes outside the pattern, then we're at risk of messing up with, and very seriously. People can die from this. So, like, the way I look at intuition is, it's not a way to get to the correct answer, but it's a way to start asking the questions. Like your thought of, is there a link between this variable and this variable? Is there a connection between that singularity and the start of the universe? Like, I think your intuition of saying, like, yeah, I could see this pattern being a real thing, but you can't make any determinations based on that. You can ask the question. And what I think you need to do, if you're going to be honest, is say, I have the question now. Where do I go? How do I validate this? And so I think you're on the right track. And I'm not saying that we throw out intuition entirely, but I think the difference is how we're using it. And where I would use intuition to say, this is how we start asking the question instead of answering the question. What are your thoughts on that? Or Richard, if you have any particular thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just add on quickly before you answer that, if you don't mind, Chris. I've found it very interesting. I've just been listening to you and Ben have this conversation, and I've noticed from the outset of the call, every time you're talking about, God existing in the kind of, in this panentheistic way that you're describing it, you're saying it could do. You're not saying it does or there is evidence for it. What you're saying is this could be a possibility. And that, as Ben has just said, just to tag on to what Ben's just said, that's a good thing that you're asking these questions. There seems to be, for me, there's some disconnect because you're asking the right question, but you kind of, then you seem to be taking this leap to, it does exist, I believe in it. And I'm wondering what that bridge is between these really good questions you're asking and the conclusion you're making. So if you want to respond largely to Ben, but just bear in mind that kind of little add-on I've added.
Okay. Yeah, so I have like terrible short-term memory, so I'm going to try to get through it quick. But so to what Ben said about intuition being, I guess, like 100% reliable as far as making conclusions, I think you can. I think really it's like you're just weighing against, you're weighing two theories against each other. You're like, okay, like based on the information you have within yourself, you're like, okay, God doesn't exist. So what does that mean? What does that mean about the world? And like you weigh the opposite theory, and you say, okay, God does exist, or something like God exists. And so you, like in my head, what I'm doing is I guess my intuition is sort of pointing towards this pantheistic theory. And it's hard to put it into words, I guess, the evidence that surrounds it. But that's essentially what I've done in the last like 4 years.
Well, but that's my issue, is that I don't think it's enough to just weigh things next to each other and make my own determination on it, because I know I'm not an expert in physics. I'm not an expert in cosmetology. All of that is like way above my head. And like, even if I were to make my own determination on these things, I cannot confidently say that my intuition or my knowledge on the subject is reliable. At most, I can say I don't know. Like, and I think you're, like Richard was saying, I think it's a good framing for you to say it could be a possibility. And I think you can still, I think you can still compare things and compare how likely something is versus another. And I think it's okay to have that thought process. I'm just not ready to be confident and say that even if I personally lean in a direction, that that's necessarily going to be true or correct. Like, I'm not confident enough to go there. Do you think that you are, or do you think you're taking more of a kind of like backseat position on this and just trying to do the best you can? Like, where do you see yourself on that?
That's a good question. I think I'm pretty sure, personally.
What makes you that confident?
So I mean, so yeah, I guess another avenue that I kind of like explored beyond like the Big Bang is like a little quantum mechanics. Like, you know, so I'm not an expert in like any kind of physics, obviously. So what I know is, you know, could be misinterpreted, or it could be a misinterpretation, whatever. But
so I guess with that, like, I mean, real quick, but you just said you're not an expert and you might be misinterpreting. So then how does that affect your confidence level? Like you said, you were very confident, but then you say, well, I might have misinterpreted.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
So that's just my
So,
thing,
I mean,
is like, it's like I hear a lot of people go and say that they're very confident in something that they don't really have a lot of study in. And it just, I don't have that ability to be that confident. Maybe because I'm in a field where overconfidence is very, very deadly. And I'm very hesitant if I'm not, and even if I am confident, I'm still worried that I'm going to get it wrong. But it's just, maybe it's worth like evaluating why you're this confident. And do you think that you are in a position where you can be that confident? I'm curious, like, what do you think about that?
No, so you're right. I mean, there's definitely like a lot more I could read on quantum mechanics, or like whatever I'm trying to like use as evidence for one thing or another. Like, I admit that I'm not, you know, fully knowledgeable in these subjects, but it's, I guess you could say, like, to the extent to which I know about X, Y, and Z, I think X, Y, and Z point to this conclusion.
But I'm not sure that's Chris. If I can just jump in quickly, I'm not sure that's what you're doing, because you said you kind of had these, you were weighing these two kind of ideas, or these two theories beside each other, that there is no God and that there is. And, you know, we were starting from kind of the beginning with the Big Bang, and that was kind of where you were putting a lot of your scope. And how is it that you kind of, and bear in mind that all the criticisms that Ben has brought up, and you keep saying, well, that's a good point, that's a good point, that's a good point. So where is it? Where is this confidence coming from? Because it seems that, you know, when even when very simple kind of criticisms to this methodology that you're using is put to you, you seem to be agreeing with the criticisms. So what is it that's kind of making you go beyond those criticisms, other than just simply, well, it might be the case, which is, it feels to me is what you're saying, is that's what that intuition to me is telling me, that you're saying it feels like it might be the case. Well, that's fair enough, and that's a good starting point, but that shouldn't be the conclusion. And it seems you're taking the starting point and making that the conclusion. So, you know, I think when you're asking yourself these questions, you know, rather than saying, well, it might be this and quantum mechanics might tell us that, have a look at what those things actually do tell us. And have a look. If you don't, I certainly have no expertise in quantum mechanics like Ben. And if you don't, go to the people who do, and say to them, people are open. People are open to dialogue. And if you've got questions about quantum mechanics, you can email professors at universities who study quantum mechanics and ask them questions. And in many cases, they'll respond to you. They do. They get questions like this all the time off people, and or at least they'll have a fact page somewhere where you can find the answer to these questions and actually look into what it actually says relating to the specific thing you're looking for. And if it doesn't mention anything about God or a consciousness at the start of the universe, then ask yourself, well, why? If this is the thing I'm putting all my stock in, why are all of the answers that I'm getting irrelevant to this? And why are they not coming up with this conclusion? Because I think that's very, very important. And you're great to talk to. You're clearly an honest person who's genuinely just looking into these things. But I think for me, it seems like you're too quick to either jump to the conclusion or to use the question you're asking yourself as the conclusion. And I think you kind of need to do much more of the legwork in the actual methodology before coming to these conclusions.
Okay. I think that's a fair fair framing of what I said. But yeah, I mean, so is there anything like about, so I guess a question to both of you guys, is there anything about the Big Bang, or like whatever you know about the Big Bang, or like just science in general, that leads you to believe there's no God? Like, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's no 100% proof, but like, I think you guys might also be using intuition to partially come to a
No,
conclusion.
because I'm not starting with a claim at all. I'm starting with I don't know. So there's no need for me to find evidence to prove that there is no God. I'm starting with I don't know, and as evidence comes out, I may or may not change my mind.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as Ben. There's a and kind of my field of study is religion. So I've already got a kind of background in lots of, not just Christian or pantheism, but lots and lots of different kind of religious areas. And I've never seen anything that has convinced me. And I'm a lifelong atheist. I've not come out of religion, and I've never seen anything which has convinced me that there is a God. Never mind that any particular kind of God or any particular religion's God is more likely than another one. And that's kind of where I would start. If within the work that I do, looking at the things that I look at, if something catches my attention and presents itself as a possibility, then I'm going to be really interested. But I haven't even got that far yet. And I find that interesting. That's not a bad thing to me. I think it's interesting that there are so many of these ideas out there, and so different and so disparate than so many people believe in. And yet there doesn't seem to be a single thing in any field that actually gives us that evidence or that proof that this thing may actually exist.
Okay. Well, I guess it's like, I don't know, it's weird to kind of like juggle this idea of God existing in your head. Not any particular God, but like just something that created it all. But it's hard to find like physical evidence of it, but it feels so true. It's weird.
But feelings, as we know, can be wrong, and I'm not saying that it necessarily is the case that feelings are always wrong, but feelings can be wrong, and all you have to do is you turn around to somebody with a complete competing religious claim and ask them if they feel that their religion is true. I'm very good friends with a Muslim. He will say he feels that his religion is true. He feels it from deep within inside himself. And you'll get that from lots and lots of different religious backgrounds. Therein, it gives us a really, really big problem with that methodology, that just feeling something, and that even if it's a strong feeling, even if it's a very convincing feeling, that is a poor methodology, because we have so many different people making so many alternative and contradictory claims, and we don't have a yardstick really to put between them and say, well, this one is more likely. When we're talking about intuition and feelings, how do we measure that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess you really just have to, I mean, if you're a pantheist or pantheist or, you know, whatever, a theist, you got to just build a theory or something. And, you know, if it
I agree.
like
But, you know, that's test it with, and I'm not, you know, I don't just do kind of empirical kind of evidence stuff. I'm into philosophy. I think proof's a good thing as well. I'll accept proof. And you know, there doesn't seem to be any. But build an argument if you're talking about a philosophical argument. Build a case if you're talking about empiricism, and you know, and kind of present that. But if you're doing it if you're saying, for me personally, I'm not saying this is me. I'm saying if you are saying, for me personally, my case for God is the stuff at the beginning of the universe, the singularity that formed the Big Bang, where the Big Bang came from, go to the people who study that and look at their opinions on that matter and see if there's a place for God in there, and see if any of their work suggests that there is a God, and do the work and repeat those experiments. That's how it works. And it's a much better method than I feel this is true, because I feel this is true can give you any answer you want to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Cool. I guess I'll do a little more reading, and I'll come back to you guys with some more evidence.
Yeah, please call back. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, go on, please.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And you guys were great too. But so you guys are both agnostic atheists, or do you guys?
I'd call
them. Yes, I would take that position.
Yeah, so would I.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was an absolutely brilliant call.
It was. First of all, I have residency brain, and I don't sleep anymore. So I know I said, I was trying to say cosmology and I said cosmetology because my brain doesn't work. So I was like, I have to mention that I know that my brain slipped, but because otherwise people are gonna get on my case. But it's funny. It's funny how things happen.
I thought you were just inventing a new field of study. I was about to go out rush out.
Oh, I was. I'm going to. Yeah. No, I mean the point stands, but I'm not an expert in that.